Hi there, and welcome along to episode 5 of the Gardener Ben podcast. I hope you all enjoyed episode 4 just as much as I did, and listening to the chat I had with Jeff, the Rose Dude, last week. If you haven't caught the episode, make sure that you catch up with it at another time, because it really is a lovely listen. You can find Jeff using Instagram, TikTok and YouTube under the username The Rose Dude. So do head over to those channels and show him some love now. Today's episode is all about bare root roses as we motor towards the beginning of November. It's been a turbulent week weather-wise here. One moment gloriously sunny and it's been really warm and dry. The next moment it's been driving with rain and dark grey. So really changeable. The soil has become very wet and very cold, so this planting window as we head to November and into the very beginning of December is really important. I've been emptying out my summer bedding and planted the first of my spring flowering bulbs, making sure I top off my pots with a decorative layer of horticultural grit to protect my tender plants like the pansies and polyanthus, not only from the slugs and the snails, but to stop them rotting off during the winter months as well. If you don't follow along on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook or on YouTube, make sure that you're making the most of my affiliate links if you intend to buy David Austin roses. If you're based in the UK or in the European community, you can use the links in my bios on any one of my social media platforms to access the David Austin website. You can then go ahead and use code BEARROOT24, all in capital letters, to get yourself 15% off of your entire order. Or if you're only ordering 1 or 2 roses for your collection this year, consider using the code BR24BEN. That's BR24BEN. And this will get you a free packet of mycorrhizal fungi, which you're going to need for the planting of your new bare root roses. Whichever option you choose, make sure that you follow one of the links in my bio, either on Instagram, TikTok or Facebook. Right. We're on to bare root rose season, and over the coming weeks I'm going to be producing mountains of media on this particular subject. I absolutely love bare root plants. I suppose it's the very traditional horticulturalist in me that used to buy bare root trees and bare root fruit plants way back 20 or 30 years ago. Bare root plants look really uninspiring, and if you're new to the subject you may look at them and think, oh goodness me, I may have been sold something a little bit duff here, but believe you me, they will plant, get themselves established and produce flowers within just a few months with the correct care and attention and of course the aftercare. And in this particular episode I'm going to talk you through what's best. Once you've watched obviously one of my 135 individual rose reviews or dozens of best of collections, which include best for shade, best for growing in a pot, best for cutting, best for fragrance, the list goes on and on. Once you've watched those videos and you've shortlisted yourself down and you've decided which varieties you're going to add to your garden, make sure that you choose a delivery date that you're going to be at home for. Your roses will arrive sealed in a cardboard paper package and they can remain in this state for up to 2 weeks. Place them in a cool, dry, dark place out of direct sunlight, preferably somewhere that remains cool and frost-free. A shed, a garage, a carport, or even your front porch. Once you're ready to plant, you want to get yourself some basic kit to hand, and I always find that rainwater is best for this, as it obviously doesn't contain any harmful chemicals or chlorine. You're now ready to go ahead and open the package. Now, my advice differs from a lot of other people. I prefer to turn the package upside down and shake it by its feet, allowing all of your roses to drop into the very top of the bag. Now, if you're placing a particularly large order and an extravagant purchase has been made, you're actually going to receive a box rather than a bag, and you want to approach the box with the same amount of caution. Don't forget that the plants inside do have thorns and they will bite you if you're not paying attention. So by turning the bag upside down and shaking them into the very top, you can actually open the bag by the foot of the bag and pull them out like a mandrake by the root, avoiding getting yourself torn up or spiked by any nasty thorns. Once you've opened your package and you've removed them feet first, make sure that you check your order thoroughly. And if you've ordered roses from David Austin, your roses will actually be wrapped up in their box or their cardboard paper bag in a potato starch bag, which is green and very silky to the touch. This can either be buried in the garden where it will rot in just a couple of weeks, be put in your kitchen food waste bin, or added to your compost heap, whichever you prefer. You're then ready to go ahead and rehydrate your roses. This process just involves placing your roses fully submerged up to the union or graft point. Make sure you get all the roots tucked into the bucket and fill it up with rainwater from your water butt. Your roses can stay like this for anywhere from between 2 and 24 hours to make sure they have all the water they need. Now, I must confess that if the weather conditions have been unfavourable, I've actually left roses in this condition for quite a long time. I'm quite appalled by how long I've left roses in this state for, and I'm not actually going to confess, but I did have someone message me on YouTube just a few days ago saying they brought a bare root Donahue, which was launched way back in 2023. They bought it bare root over the autumn and winter season 2023 into 2024, and it was still in a bucket of water now, flowering away quite happily. Now, this is not something I would advise you do, but it obviously just goes to prove that the roses are much hardier and tougher than people give them credit for. So if the weather conditions turn, or you get busy and can't get out and plant your roses in the allotted or suggested time window, don't beat yourself up too much. They will be more than fine. Likewise, if the weather turns cold and the bucket freezes solid, don't panic. Your roses can handle really cold temperatures way back down into the minus figures, and I assure you they will be absolutely fine. Once you're ready to plant, you need to gather together a few basic pieces of equipment, which most domestic gardeners will have to hand. You're going to need a spade, a digging fork, and some well-rotted horse manure, some soil conditioner, or some homemade garden compost, and you're then ready to plant. Head off into the garden and decide where you're going to plant the rose. And obviously, if you've made a special selection, most people have normally got a plot spot in mind. Over the last couple of weeks on my Instagram subscription-based content, I've been talking to my subscribers about moving roses, and more importantly, if you've lost a rose in the garden, how to make soil amendments. So if you're concerned about that particular subject, head over to my Instagram and watch that video at your leisure. You need to dig yourself a really nice sized planting pocket. Something in the region of about 80 centimetres in diameter and around 70 to 80 centimetres deep. Now, I know this sounds lavish and particularly large, but you want to make sure that the rose has access to the subsoil and doesn't have to work too hard to plunge its really long roots down into the soil. Skip this stage and your rose will really struggle in future years to come, so that's where the digging fork comes in. Create your hole around 60 to 70 centimetres in diameter and, as I say, about 70 to 80 centimetres deep. Then, using your digging fork, break up the bottom of the hole. We do this so your rose can actually escape the planting pocket and plunge its roots down into the subsoil. Roses don't have a huge amount of roots, but they do like to look for water and will be much more drought tolerant and be able to stave off pest and disease problems if they can access water right down into the subsoil, especially when they're producing large amounts of flowers and foliage in June, July, August and September, when water levels and moisture levels may be low. Using your fork, break up the bottom of the planting pocket and then incorporate several really decent handfuls of your planting media. As I say, this can be a ground compost, stuff that you've produced in your own compost bin at home, or well-rotted horse or cow manure. Make sure it is well-rotted and it's not something you're simply picking up from a local stable, which is quite fresh. It needs to be at least 2 or 3 years old. And the difference between cow and horse manure is the amount of weed seed you're getting it. Cows actually have 4 stomachs, and as a result, weed seed is very unlikely to be able to pass through their intestines without actually being killed. So if you can get hold of cow manure, you're going to save yourself a whole lot of weeding. Incorporate some into the bottom of the hole and fork it around with your digging fork. And then add around a bucket, around 2 or 3 gallons, to the soil media that you've dug out of the hole. You're then ready to plant, which I find always to be the really exciting thing. Before you start filling in the hole, please mock this up slightly. You want to place your bare root rose into the hole and spread the roots out. Make sure they're not all bunched up together and make sure they're not touching the bottom of the hole and they are therefore squashed. You want them to be as straight as possible into their natural positions. Now, I fully understand that during the budding process, some plants can arrive to you looking very, very strange indeed. Some will have growth listing off to the left and some will be favouring growing right, but you'll need to balance this up as best you can. And this is sometimes mirrored in the root systems as well. So try to get the plant as square and as level in the planting pocket as you can, with the roots spread out evenly and not squashed up. Now, advice on the next part has changed greatly over the last 5 or 6 years as our weather conditions across the world have become more turbulent. Here on the south coast of the UK, just outside the outskirts of the New Forest, we're quite often growing away quite happily in December at 14 degrees. Our nighttime temperatures dropping off to around 8 or 9, which is nothing to really write home about. The next day the weather can turn and we can be plunged into minus figures. Just 2 years ago, we were growing away quite happily in December at around 8 degrees during the day and about 6 or 7 degrees overnight. The weather turned very, very quickly. I still had roses in bloom at that point as well on the run up to Christmas. The likes of Princess Anne and Claire Austin still heavily in bloom. Overnight we received a frost without warning of -8, and it was absolutely catastrophic in the garden. Not only did it kill an acacia tree that I'd planted for the Royal Jubilee, but it also killed an awful lot of roses which were planted as the original advice was, with their union points above ground. Now we are a little bit more cautious. Your graft or union point should actually be plunged into the ground by around 2 or 3 inches. So make sure that you have a piece of bean cane, or you can use the shaft of your spade just to level off the top of the hole and make sure that you're planting at the correct depth. Now obviously a couple of episodes ago we were talking about the winterization process, and if you're growing somewhere particularly cold under growing zone 6, you may then wish to heap up contracted bark or leaf mulch around your plants, protecting the lower stems from being frosted off. But you do need to make sure that you get the graft or union point plunged into the ground by around 2 or 3 inches as you plant. Get the rows into the planting pocket, level it up, and as I say, make sure those roots are in as natural position as possible. You can then start backfilling with the soil that you prepared with your soil conditioner earlier. Bring the soil in and don't be afraid to be rough at this particular point in time. You want to make sure that the soil has really good contact with the roots of the plant. On a micro level, the plant obviously has been stripped of its roots and is now only presented with its woody stems. These will in turn, once the weather conditions start to warm up, actually start to form hair-like very small white roots, which are the ones which actually draw up moisture and water into the plant. So you want to make sure that the plant is in really good contact with the soil, and we do this by firming them in. You can do this in several ways. Either with a balled fist, you can push your weight down around the plant, firming the soil as you go. Continue to backfill, and if you wanted to and you're not particularly strong in the shoulders, you can then put your heel around the actual plant itself, lightly firming the soil around the plant and continuing to backfill the hole until it's fully filled. Then it is time to give it a really good water, and even if the soil conditions are really wet or rain is forecast, this is the bit you do not want to skip. On a micro level, getting the plant wet at this point with at least 3 or 4 gallons of water will ensure great contact with the soil and the root system, meaning that very, very quickly, once the weather conditions start to improve and the temperatures start to rise, your plant will then start to produce hair-like roots and then ultimately buds. Missing this stage can be absolutely catastrophic, so make sure that you've got a couple of watering cans of water on hand when you plant every single rose. It's important that you look after your rose in the next few weeks ahead. One of the biggest things that I get commented on, especially on YouTube, is where people see the roses that I post about. Now, as a rose reviewer, I will never offer you my personal opinion on a variety that I have not had growing in my garden under a controlled circumstance for at least 4 full seasons. 12 months is a huge investment, but I take the job of reviewing roses incredibly seriously. I've spent thousands of pounds of my own money, sometimes buying roses that I haven't been particularly happy about. So when people ask me for my professional opinion, I make sure it is well-rounded and educated. So the biggest complaint I have from people, especially when they see the roses that I post online, which may be 3, 4, 5, 6, sometimes even 10 years old, that they bought a plant bare root, popped it in the ground in March, and in June it hasn't performed exactly as they expected it to be. Now, the thing is, roses, especially large shrub roses and climbing roses, are a long-term investment. These things aren't a bedding plant. They, of course, will establish themselves quickly and get themselves growing away and produce flowers very quickly. But the longer you leave them to establish, the better the plant will be. So make sure that you look after it carefully, especially in its first 12 to 36 months in the ground. A plant that's newly planted, whether it's potted or bare root, is going to need a lot of water. And I often talk to a lot of my followers online about this particular subject. And I've done this in real-time tutorial video form, where I've filled up a normal-sized watering can, which contains around 2 gallons of water, real-time whilst talking in the background. And most people are normally absolutely shocked and horrified just how long it takes to fill up a watering can with water. A newly planted rose is going to need in excess of 10 to 14 litres of water 2 or 3 times a week depending on the weather conditions. Now, as the gardener, this is something that you're going to have to judge in your own growing space, but I would always advise that you water a plant that's been in the ground less than 18 months on a very regular basis, even if rain is present, and you do so deeply wherever possible. One of the biggest problems with roses is getting the foliage and in turn the flowers wet, and most people will struggle, normally because this is a man thing, that they like to go out into the garden and spray everything with water, which for a rose is absolutely terrible. Rose watering is a little bit different to watering most parts of your garden. Normally we would always suggest you water your garden towards the back end of the day, just as the sun sets. And we do this to make sure that as much water gets taken down into the soil and doesn't evaporate as at all possible. However, if you're a huge rose grower like me, you don't water at the end of the day, you actually water at the beginning part of the day. And we do that to make sure that we're not trapping cold, damp and wet air around the plants and between the foliage and the soil overnight, which in turn can be the perfect breeding ground for things like black spot, mould and mildew. So watering should always take place in the early morning wherever possible. And it's a job I love doing around 5:30, 6 or maybe 7 o'clock in the morning, whilst wandering around normally in my pyjamas drinking a cup of tea out in the garden and listening to the birds sing. Personally, I prefer to water with an irrigation system or watering can, especially when it comes to freshly or newly planted plants. I advise wherever possible you water by the entire watering can, anywhere between 12 and 14 litres of water a couple of times a week. As the plant ages and gets itself established, you can start stretching out the different times between their watering slots and go up to maybe once or twice a week as the plant gets itself settled and established. You'll obviously need to make amendments if we go through long periods of dry weather without any rain at all. This can sometimes be the point that a plant dies, when you've taken off the stabilisers and think that it's secure and established, but doesn't quite have the root system to deal with the weather conditions it's experiencing. So make sure you keep an eye on them for at least 12 to 18 months. Another question I get asked dozens and dozens of times each and every year is about the feeding of newly planted bare root plants. Depending on where you've planted them, whether you've planted them in the ground or whether you've planted them into a container, they're going to need different things. And if you want, you can apply a slow-released fertiliser around the base of the plant. However, for me, I prefer to add as much mulch as at all possible. I even mulch off the top of my pots, removing around 4 inches of growing media each year for about 2 or 3 years in succession, replacing it with good quality soil conditioner at the top. This feeds the entire planter. Plants also grown in containers will receive a fortnightly feed from the moment they start flowering to the time they go dormant. And personally, I like to use Envy Sea Feed Extra for this, but that's just my personal preference. Plants in the ground aren't offered a liquid feed whatsoever, and in turn, I'm actually relying 100% on the mulch and the soil amendments I'm making during the winter. Here, as we head towards November, we're rapidly heading towards mulching season. And this normally for me takes place after I've cleared my borders. I spoke about in a previous episode about the fact I like to leave all of my herbaceous perennials standing and not clear anything in my borders or carry out any pruning right until after Christmas. And this has always coincided with the mulching of my borders and the application of my decorative wooden mulch. When we first took over this garden, it was in a real state, and I had absolutely no idea what the regime had been looking after its soil and its soil structure, so I decided to start at the very beginning. Creating massive flower beds here, I managed to pump in as much organic matter as possible, and I started by using around 10 cubic metres of soil conditioner every single year, spreading it out evenly across my borders to a depth of between 3 and 4 inches, completely covering every single available surface that was exposed in soil conditioner. I did this for around 3 or 4 years, which in my eyes gives all the plants the instant caffeine they need, a huge hit of nutritional value available in the soil, because soil conditioner is ground down to a particle size of between 10 and 14 millimetres. Now, lucky enough, being a full-time and professional gardener and driving a tipper truck, I can get hold of this by the cubic metre. But you can also buy this in dumpy bag form, for instance from Amazon, where you can have it dropped on your driveway and shovel it out at your leisure. After about 4 or 5 years of piling soil conditioner onto the top of my soil, I was left with a really, really beautiful crumbly loam-based soil. I was also seeing massive amounts of worm activity within the borders anytime I dug, and we acquired ourselves several moles. Now, this can be really very annoying. Moles can be very destructive. However, they are a fantastic signal that you have plenty of organic matter and activity going in your soil. So try and take this, if you end up with a mole, as a real good compliment. Having really worked hard on my soil structure and making sure that there was plenty of nutritional value in the soil, over the last couple of years I've changed my tactics with my mulching, and I'm now using a woodland mulch, which is basically chipped up tree. Anything from about the size of your wrist all the way through to about 15 to 18 inches in diameter is passed through a chipper, and the resulting wood chip is a particle of around 20 to 25 millimetres in size. This offers me a decorative finish and seals in the moisture. It suppresses the weeds, and slowly but surely this woodland mulch breaks down. It takes around 18 to 24 months to be completely consumed by the soil, so it's there a small amount of it now remains on the soil between mulchings. But I'm going to use this product again this year. It also includes some green matter, so there is some composted leaf and twig within the product as well. But this is a really good and very inexpensive way of dressing off the soil, sealing in moisture, suppressing the weeds, and more importantly, adding a really good amount of nutritional value to your soil. If you're not going to do any application in the garden whatsoever, I would really advise you to mulch. It is one of the most important things that you can do, especially if you have a very hard or particularly wet or cold soil. If you're gardening on a clay soil, by simply covering the soil surface in mulch 3 or 4 years in a row, choose whichever product you like, whether it's leaf mulch, whether it's well-ground garden compost, whether it's well-rotted horse manure, I promise you, after 3 or 4 years of covering the soil surface to a depth of around 3 or 4 inches every single year, your soil will be completely and miraculously different after a very short period of time. You'll see a huge amount of worm activity, which again is something that people seem to find very annoying, especially when it comes to their lawns. And I posted a video just a few days ago about how you should be maintaining your lawn in your autumn and winter season, to receive several comments from people saying they were terribly annoyed by the fact they had worm casts on their lawn. To which I rebuff and say that this is a really, really good sign that there's organic matter into the soil, and there is plenty of worms there to come up through the soil surface and open up its soil structure, creating channels for the air to go right down deep into the soil. So these are a really, really good positive sign. Somebody even asked me how they could eliminate worms from their lawn completely, which I found completely absurd, but obviously answered as politely as at all possible. So what I'm saying to you is always mulch. No matter what the garden is, whether you've got a poor sandy soil, whether you've got a heavy clay soil, you can fix most of your garden problems with mulch. The surprising fact of the matter is soils that contain a large amounts of organic matter will actually hold much more moisture during the summer months. And on the flip side of that, soils with large amounts of organic matter within themselves actually will drain much more freely during the winter months. So it's a plus and a plus point. Add that to the ability that you can suppress weeds and don't have to go out and weed so regularly, and the fact you can seed in large amounts of moisture and limit the amount of watering you have to do between rain showers. For me, it's a no-brainer, and it's a job that I absolutely adore in the garden. So after leaving everything standing until well after Christmas, normally till the end of January, I'll finally get out into the new year and start clearing my way through the borders, removing the herbaceous perennials and starting trimming back the roses. And it's at this point, before all of the bulbs start coming up, that I'll apply my mulches across all of my garden surfaces. I find it incredibly therapeutic and really nice to also get the vegetable and cutting garden sorted at this particular point in time as well, redressing and remulching the borders and paths, and it looks really smart and very, very inviting once it's all done. If you have any questions at all regarding the planting, handling and of course maintenance of bare root roses, head over to my Instagram, YouTube, TikTok or Facebook profiles now. You'll find me using the username _gardenerben, and there's plenty more information across my channels on the subject there. You can always leave me a question under this podcast too if you need any help or assistance. Once you've watched all the videos you like, make sure that you make the most of my affiliate links and of course the discount codes available, which expire on the 1st of December. Follow any one of the links in my bio directly to the David Austin website and either enter the code BEARROOT24 for 15% off your full order if you're ordering in the UK or EU, or if you want to get hold of yourself a free packet of mycorrhizal fungi, which can aid in the stimulation of strong and healthy root growth, use the code BR24BEN and that will get you a free packet of mycorrhizal fungi. Again, this offer is valid until the 1st of December and can only be used by people ordering in the EU or the UK. Next week on episode 6, I have the pleasure on actually bringing you 2 invited guests. And I'm so excited to have these 2 lovely human beings along on the Gardener Ben podcast. Next week, I'm going to be joined by the girls from Sorrel. Sorrel is a cafe and flower farm in North Dorset. And I visited Sorrel on several occasions, not only because right next door, run by their parents, is Black Pig Retreats, which is a beautiful camping or glamping experience just outside Shaftesbury, but I've also had the pleasure of dining at their wonderful cafe on more than one occasion. Natalie and Matilda will be joining me next week on the podcast, and we'll be talking not only about fowl farming, but also working as part of a sibling team and alongside their parents in a family business. I can't wait to share my chat with you then. So make sure that you tune into the Gardener Ben podcast next week. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode, and I'll see you all again very soon. Happy gardening.